Hello, everyone. I'm Taha Kehar. I'm the co-editor of the Stained Glass Window, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce you to our two esteemed guests on the second episode of the series. As you know, the series is all about talking to the beating hearts of our anthology, which are our contributors, and we have two of them here. On my right is Vajiha Haider. Vajiha Haider is a writer and an editor based in Lahore. She's currently working at the News on Sunday, where she's responsible for the magazine's books and travel sections. She specializes in writing features and personal essays that focus on culture, society, and life. Her work has appeared in The Missing Slate and the News on Sunday, among other publications. So, welcome, Vajiha. And to my left is Mahin Humayun, who's a writer, poet, and educator based in Karachi. She has a BA in English literature and creative writing. Her novella, Special, was published in 2012, and she continues to focus her time on short fiction, women's rights, and mental health awareness. So, welcome.
Thank
And
you, guys.
the both of you have stories in this anthology, and this session in particular is called Experimenting with Genres in the COVID-19 Story. And both of you have done that in your own specific way. So I'm going to first of all introduce your stories. Mahin's story is called Shadow of the Past, and Vajiha's story is called The Unwritten Story, which is intriguing as a title as well. So my question to the both of you is that the pandemic was a disconcerting, almost distressing period for all of us. What inspired you to write at a time like this? Because Muniza Shamsi was on the previous panel and she was amazed at how there was creative output coming out about the coronavirus. And I just wanted to know what you guys had to say about that. How did you get your creative juices flowing? Who would like to go first?
I can go.
Yeah.
Should I go? Okay.
Yeah.
I think when it began, I was primarily just writing for myself, little snippets of poetry. And actually, when you gave the prompt, I was a little stuck and confused. But I think honestly, my biggest motivation usually in writing is a deadline sometimes in a case like this, because writing about the pandemic and your reality is almost stifling to take yourself out of it and reflect on it in a new form. And I think for me, the constant push was just that now that I'm in the story, it needs to be told and it needs to be written. And having the deadline obviously helped me a lot. Yeah, and I guess the inspiration was just feeling that lull or almost feeling stuck in your reality and wanting to find a way to breathe. And usually fiction for me is a form of, I guess, taking a new breath and a new day.
That's fascinating. Vajiha, what do you have to say about this?
And is about how I'm constantly going through a writer's block in one way or the other. That's the thing I'm always very excited to write about, which is kind of sad, and I'm not quite sure what it really says about me as a writer. But yeah, so my writing has always been in a state of crisis of some sort. So when the lockdown happened in March, it was initially for 2 weeks, which of course turned into this huge, this ordeal, never-ending ordeal of sorts that we, find ourselves in now. So when the lockdown happened, I thought, probably now is the time. I'll have so much time to myself, and no more school drop-offs or events to go to. So I'll, finally get the time to do what I have always wanted to do. That is, to write without any disturbance. But I was to find out later that, there is, no such thing as writing without disturbance. And, you can't no such thing as having all the time in the world. You need to make time in order to to write. So interestingly, my writing routine got a little worse after the lockdown. So, I was lately discussing this with with a friend, with our mutual friend, Safina. She's a brilliant writer herself.
Yeah.
That when you're at home all day long or all the time, it seems that you're not doing a lot, but you actually are, and your work increases in so many ways. So, coming back to your question, the one day as I was sitting on my desk and contemplating, what to do and how to to utilize this immense time, I suddenly received this WhatsApp message from Taha. Was it you, Taha, or Sana? I
It
think it
was
was
me.
you.
It was me.
It was
It
you.
could have been the both of us. We were both
Yeah. So
feverishly
anyway, he
messaging
messaged
everyone.
me. So anyway, he messaged me asking me to contribute something to this anthology that Sana and that he was working with Sana, and Sana and he were working with together. And I it was like I was overwhelmed at first, and I have to tell you that I have never really written fiction before professionally.
I
So I
remember
was
that.
like yeah, I have told that many times. Yeah. So I was like, should I or should I not? But then I thought to myself, well, you've always wanted to do this, and now is as good a time as any. So, you should just do it. So I accepted it and I began writing, and it was difficult at first, to be honest. Um, but then when I started it and it started forming into something that resembled a story, I got excited um, about the things that could happen and the possibilities and the places where it could go to. Um, but I believe nothing of this sort would have happened without a concrete deadline. As Maheen also said, I think it is the deadline that works the best with me. It is how my muse works with me.
I guess deadlines are everyone's savior, and as writers, that is. So I'll go back to Maheen because the question I want to ask sort of ties in with what I asked you guys earlier. Your story, Shadow of the Past, deals with the value of creative expression. Your character tries to maneuver through the realities of lockdown by writing. So, what can you tell me about the healing power of writing? Is there such a thing? Can it really offer catharsis? Can it really put your mind at ease?
I think definitely, I think most writers can tell you there's a lot of different facets to it. Of course, writing to reach a deadline causes a lot of anxieties generally, but writing through the process of pain or grief or loneliness, all of it essentially causes so much healing. Personally, for me, and I think for a lot of writers as well, because going through that journey when you're creating a character or finding a plot or delving into a specific setting, that entire world that you create becomes this form of healing. And I think that's really important. The catharsis that comes at the end once you've put it to bed and put it to rest. Although personally, I don't think a story can ever essentially be put to rest because I'm a perfectionist and I always want to go back and edit. But I think
Mhm.
during that entire process, the time you give to it, because it comes with so much isolation and time spent reflecting and thinking by yourself, that in itself is healing. So all the different processes of writing and all of that coming together for me, I think is the biggest form of inspiration, maybe. And generally, I think since I've been a child, I think I started writing at 13, and I always wrote to heal. And even with Jiha, like you said, in times of crisis or in times of intense pain or sadness, or even just those tiny moments of teenage anxieties or drama, I always just kind of put pen to paper. And once it was out, I could breathe again. I was like, okay, I feel so much better now. And it's the same process for me till today. When I write something, be it short fiction, longer fiction, or poem, it always makes me feel better and always makes me feel partly healed. Yeah, maybe not fully,
Exactly.
but partly. Yeah.
So now I'm going to go back to Vajiha, and this is a more specific question about your character, Ahmad. Um, First of all, was it difficult writing from a man's perspective, or was it something you had to, or something that came very easily to you?
It was a bit difficult because,
Mhm.
there are so many things that you need to take care of, and so many things that you don't know when, you are writing from another gender's perspective.
Mhm.
When I started writing the story, I was not really sure where I wanted it to go, as it happens with a lot of, stories, and, it happens with a lot of writers. So I wrote one draft, I discarded it. I wrote another draft, I absolutely detested it. So when I began the third one, I knew that I had to use a man's voice. I It was difficult. I mean, honestly, it was very difficult because, you tend you tend to think about things as a woman when you are a woman. And um so yeah, it was difficult, but I sort of, I wanted this to be a sort of, a monologue, since I've always enjoyed those, and I believe it is the best way uh, to to go through, or to elaborate on so many emotions and feelings that one goes through. So I don't know. I just wanted to have a protagonist, a male protagonist, for some reason. Just, happened.
It's instinct. So fascinatingly enough, one thing I enjoyed about your story was how it delves into the fractured mind of a cynic. He, I'm not going to give you any spoilers, anyone out there, because these are stories you should savor on your own time. But Vajiha's character locks himself in his apartment and just says to hell with the world. I don't care. And I'm not going to get into the details of what inspires him to do that. But how did that character come about? Why was your male character a cynic? That's very intriguing.
It's Yeah, and I think it's very difficult to really explain it as well. I just wanted him to
Uh-huh.
be, but yeah, as I said, when I started with my, third
Uh-huh.
draft, I think it was the third or my fourth draft. I just knew that I wanted it to be first a monologue, and
Hmm.
because, I think it's the best way to actually explore what goes on in the mind of a person as you go through
Hmm.
so many different emotions all through the day, and you so many different people,
Yeah,
and you have so many interesting facets to your personality that you hardly
exactly.
show in front of people. And I thought that perhaps the best way for me to display all of that in one short story was for the protagonist to be, to indulge in a monologue. And
Yeah,
then I thought that him being an absolute cynic um, would make him more interesting, in terms of
exactly.
all the different range of emotions and feelings that goes through during the course of that one day the story is about. It has also so I'd also been reading all those stories about how surviving this pandemic and how the lockdown is proving to be harder for people who are living alone and
Mhm.
on their own. So I thought, what would a person do who's already, what would a person who's already going through a tough time with, regards to his life and, to trusting the world, who already thinks that the world is against him, how would that person behave in these times? So uh, uh, and what are the feelings and emotions that he would go through during this time? So it was just so immensely difficult for all of us to adjust to this new normal, as it is now said. about it. So I just wanted to explore. I just wanted to explore the mind of someone who is already very broken and very alone, and just imagine, I think, what he must be going through in this situation, in this absolutely uncertain situation that we are finding ourselves in lately, in these times. So
Fascinating. And you managed to do that quite successfully. Maheen's story, I don't know where she went. Okay, I think
Yeah,
she's here.
sorry, my light went.
You're
But
right
I'm back
here.
now.
Okay, great. So, in addition to writing about the value of creative expression, you also experiment with prose and poetry. It's interspersed. And I just wanted to know, because you're essentially a poet, you've written a novella in the past. I think it's been out about 8 years now. And is this something specific that you do with the story, with the form, the short story, the short fiction form, or was this something that
So,
you purposely wanted to? Yeah.
so it is something that I usually do. I prefer poetic prose. I've never actually, I think, wait, let me think of a better way to put it. I think since I was younger, I've tried to kind of use different forms of fiction into one collection. So be it a story that's shorter or longer, even the novella, I always like to add in a little bit of poetry to it just to keep it different. And usually when I write short stories, I kind of intersperse it with poetry, and it comes naturally to me. And it's something I enjoy doing. I just feel like it gives this little break. It's also because I don't love dialogue as much, and I generally struggle with dialogue as well. So it comes as
So
that time.
poetry is your form of dialogue. That
Yeah,
sense.
almost. Yeah, it's kind of a
Or
reminder.
a glimpse into the inner mind of your character.
Yeah, I think so. And it's just something I have fun with always.
And which form do you prefer most? Is it poetry or prose?
Prose. I love prose. Poetry is something I actually just started doing around 3 years ago. I'd never tried it before until I was studying in university, and I was like, this is a form I should explore, because why limit ourselves? Same with journalism.
So your protagonist, Lena, is a writer, just like Vijiha's protagonist. He is, I think, a budding writer more than anything. But
he
you're
always wanted to be a writer, but he never really, he died before.
never really.
Yeah.
So Lena is a bit more confident in terms, and more courageous with her writing, and she writes everywhere. She also has, I'm not going to get into the details of it unless you bring them up. She has conversations with a being who's not a ghostly being almost. And I want to get into that with Vijiha's story later, but just maybe her subconscious. Do you want to tell me something about that, or tell?
Sure. So when I started writing it, what I was thinking was that there would be this one character, my protagonist, which is, she's completely stuck in this reality of her room. And she's constantly seeing visions of her past self. And the past self is coming through the door and going about her daily life, and kind of, she's mocking her and she's questioning her and she's almost laughing at her. She's sarcastic, and it's kind of satirical in nature in my head, because she's constantly probing her that I can still do all of these things. I have that movement within me while you're stuck, and the protagonist is watching and listening and trying to decipher how she ever let that part of herself go. And that's what I kind of wanted to represent, because I think ultimately a lot of us during the lockdown were thinking about the past and how to deal with the people we were, because I think it's only natural once you're stuck in a place for such a long time to question how much you've changed for the better or for the worse. So I think a lot of it is her asking her, who's the better version now? Is it the girl you once were, or the girl you're finding yourself to be? And that's kind of the point of this other character, vision, fairy being, whatever you may call it.
That's fascinating. So do you think this feral being is only critical of her, or does she sympathize with her in some matters, or what do you think?
I think she's a form of motivation. So
Okay.
watching her and viewing her, although it irks the character and it reminds her of her lack of movement, I think she's also kind of showing her that all of this is still possible and motivating her to get up, change her clothes, shower, do anything, while the protagonist just doesn't seem to understand how to do it, how to find that motivation. And yeah, she could be critical in some moments of the story, but I think the purpose is essentially to push the protagonist forward, help her find her
It's
own way.
extremely relatable, though, because I think all of us went through that during the lockdown. So now back to Vajiha. Your character, Ahmad, in addition to being a cynic, is very independent in many ways. He's also, even though he maybe denies external influence, but he's extremely independent. What do you think is his relationship with the people around him? Obviously, without any spoilers. He has a neighbor, he has a mother, he has an ex-wife. He has, I mean, I'm just throwing things around without telling the story.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so Ahmad, of course, is a difficult person, to live with because of his, he's a cynic, which is getting worse due to his illness. And, he's delusional about his life. And he has had an adverse effect on all the relationships that he has had. I mean, he's not had a lot of relationships, but whatever relationships he's had, they've been really, he's not really done much, in that department. So he feels that the world does not, get him. He feels everyone is against him, out to get him, and they don't want him to get anywhere in life, and maybe are actively working against him. So he believes that that they're just putting on a show. He has immense respect for his mother, but he still finds it difficult to get in touch with her on a regular basis. He just doubts everyone to such an extent that he cannot distinguish between reality and the world that he is imagining. Um, so people want to get in touch with him. All of his, the neighbor and the mother he gets in touch with, the neighbor and everyone else. They want to get in touch with him, but he shuts them out, and then blames them for not keeping in touch. So a lack of self-worth over self-worth here, which stems from the fact that he feels that he has been unable to do anything substantial in his life with his life. He thinks that he's dying now and wants to get something done, but instead he's turning into an even worse cynic. uh, he's constantly thinking about how people think about him, and he thinks they're always thinking about him, and he's greatly disillusioned about himself. Um, he feels he's just misunderstood, that he was, meant for greater things, but the world never understood him. So whoever becomes a part of his life, he drives them away. He craves the company of people, but he does not trust them enough to let them close, and so ends up being absolutely alone, which increases to such an extent that to a great extent, and takes a toll on his already deteriorating mental health. Now that there is a pandemic going on, so he basically doesn't have any real relationship because of how he thinks about the world and about people in it.
That's fascinating. And it's a polar opposite to Maheen's character, who desperately craves that connection with the world. So, would you like to tell me a little bit about that, Lena, your character, and her desire to be back into the world? Does she want to be back into the very same world she left behind, or is it a new world that she's happy to acclimatize to? What can you tell me about that?
I think it's the tricks of nostalgia. That's what I was trying to go after.
Uh-huh.
That the idea of yearning for a past that may not have been quite as great or as magical as you hoped for. And that's kind of her curse as a character, because as she deals with this internal discourse and monologue, she's thinking and hoping and wishing for a world that she left behind. And yet
Uh-huh.
it's the questions that plague her that I hope make the reader wonder that
No, they do, definitely.
maybe the world isn't all it's set out to be. And maybe if it was written at a different time or the character was placed in a different year, things would have been different for her. But I think essentially she doesn't want to go back to that world. She just thinks she does, and she's deluding herself, because at that moment, I think with her diminishing mental health, which is just subtly kind of put in there, it's the idea that you are constantly yearning for a place that you currently aren't in. And just the idea of being trapped and claustrophobic within the confines of a room or a house, that makes you dwell on the past, that makes you imagine things to always be better.
Yeah. So eventually, Lena ends up writing and completing her poem, but Vajiha's character has a different story. The title says it all. Um, in a way, the title kind of reflects the unwritten story, tells you so much about how it's kind of like a metaphor for all the things that came to a standstill with the lockdown, with the circumstances surrounding the virus. So, what can you tell me about that? Was it a metaphor? Was it deliberate, or did you just chance upon it?
Um, so when I, start writing the story,
Uh-huh.
I kind of thought of it more on the lines of how you have so many dreams, and so many dreams that you weave your life,
Uh-huh.
around your life, and but seldom find the time and the will to work on them. And then it's time to go, and you realize that you have not done anything at all. You've not done that one thing that you always really wanted to do all your life. How death doesn't wait for you to reach a milestone that you had set for yourself. Um, um, uh, Basically, you have this notion of time, but time doesn't really stand still, and the clock is always ticking, bringing you closer to the end of your life. So, we are aware that death is around the corner, but we never really think about it too much, because we never really have any time to think about it, and we're so busy living our life. So, but with the pandemic and the lockdown, we were suddenly so much more aware of the reality of the life of our life, and the absoluteness of death. We were forced, to reckon with the idea of our mortality, and it was not a good feeling. But then we found out that we could not even run away from it, anywhere. It was just there, staring at us, constantly reminding us of its existence. So yeah, I mean, maybe that is the thought that initiated this whole idea. Um, the fact that we have all these dreams, and an idea of a perfect life that we want to live, but we don't really know. We don't really know if we'd ever be able to. Um,
Mhm.
and it's just truly very sad. But yeah, I think that was basically the idea about this behind this character. And yeah.
Yeah. So one thing I noticed about Vajiha's story is that she talks about patients who didn't have COVID-19. And it's kind of in the backdrop. It's not something that you directly speak about. But where is there a specific reason why you focused on that, or how there were some patients who were not getting the attention they deserve because of the pandemic, the public health scare? Is there a particular reason why you focused on that instead of, yeah?
Hmm. So, ever since this pandemic began,
Mhm.
I, I was thinking a lot about how people with illnesses or life-threatening illnesses who have to frequent their doctors for regular appointments, who have to go through who have to go to hospitals for their regular for routine checkups, the elderly, perhaps, for example. So I often thought about, what if something happens to them, which is not COVID, but they need immediate medical attention. And
Exactly.
how will they deal with this new reality, where going to the hospital might mean getting yourself, exposed to a virus, to this virus. No one looks forward to visiting hospital anyway. I mean, it's not the most friendliest of places. But suddenly you're now fearing a hospital like you've never really feared before. You've never really have before, because of this strange uncertainty that you suddenly find yourself in. So I thought about that. And it's also more about how medical practitioners, in their quest, for keeping their regular patients away from the virus, have actually made it difficult for their patients to reach out to them in any other manner as well. So, and they advise them to visit only when it is absolutely imperative, which is understandable. But then, for a person who's facing a life-threatening disease, just a casual visit to a doctor can somehow bring much needed comfort to them, which is now not possible because of this virus. What usually happens is that when a doctor is aware, of history of a person, he more often than not knows what is happening to that person. But it is important for the patient to visit the doctor, anyway, to feel that he's being heard, and to and that and that the doctor knows how he feels. So it almost becomes tantamount to a catastrophe when when this terminally ill person is already going through, already losing control of life, on his life, and now due to this uncertain situation, he feels more powerless and more helpless and about his life, and he has nowhere to turn to, to dispel his
Yeah,
fears. So maybe that was more of an idea behind this thing that I mentioned in the story.
that's fascinating. So I have a lot of other questions and I'll keep bringing them in, but we have a lot of comments coming in. A lot of love for Maheen and Vijiha. We have a few questions also. We could start with them. I think the first one is, it'll appear on the screen, but lots of love for the both of you. And I'll start with a question I had, which kind of marries the two stories in a way. Um, Mahin, your story deals with the lockdown and your character's reactions to it, and Vajiha's does too. Now, this is something that you guys wrote in June, July maximum. It's been 6 months. If you were to write the story now, how different would it be?
I think it would be immensely different because
Uh-huh.
I think now the yearning would be for that safety net of being inside and having the space and time to just sit down and do all the creative acts that you had lined up. I think a lot of us during the time felt stifled and felt claustrophobic and stuck, but reflecting on that time now, it was almost this serenity, although it was filled with a lot of anxiety. It was calm and it was peaceful. So I think maybe for Lena, hopefully she would have found that reflection and
Mhm.
Maybe she wouldn't have a ferial being at this point in life. Maybe she'd be her own motivator. I think there's so many ways it could have gone, but definitely a different form of movement within her. So that lack of movement would translate to greater movement now.
Great.
Kind of
That's
maneuvering
interesting.
with her anxieties, but maneuvering through it with a newfound appreciation of the time before.
What about you, Vijaya? How different would a Mad
Thinking
be?
about this, I think that it. Um, I would have written a fifth draft, I think, and a completely different story. And because
What would
when
that be? What would that
I have
entail?
no idea, I'm actually thinking about it right now. But yeah, because when this happened, when I wrote this story, we were slowly getting used to this new life that was
Mhm.
just suddenly forced upon us, and we did not really know how to deal with it. And so we were in a very different place at that time. And now is like, now we're like, you can never get used to a thing like this, but now we sort of are, we have slowly eased into this. And maybe my protagonist wouldn't have been so depressed and such a cynic.
Uh-huh.
Maybe, I don't know.
Should Ahmad would be a happy
Yeah,
person.
definitely
Okay.
different.
So we have questions from Muniba, Safina, and another person. So Muniba says, thoroughly enjoyed your pieces in writing in the book. Do you both plan on writing any books in future? One by one, guys. Reveal everything.
Mahin, I think you should start.
Well,
Because
I can't say that
my
I
answer
haven't.
is going to be just one line.
I can't say that I haven't tried to write a few over the years, but I am working on something longer right now. I guess we'll see where it goes. Lockdown gave me more time and space to write, and I think these days it's hard to find that time or push yourself.
Uh-huh.
So these days, I guess I'm more focused on the journalism, writing articles. So we will see.
And you don't
My
have
answer
anything to say on this, Vijaya? On
Yeah,
a
my answer
serious note?
is the same. I don't see a book in future. I don't. But yeah, I'd
All
like to
right.
write.
Next question is, I think, Safina. Safina's question is on the screen, is it? Yes.
Yeah.
Such an insightful discussion. My question is directed at Vijaya. When you were creating the character, you dabbled with his self-worth. Do you feel short stories are difficult to manage with the word limit, and the writer doesn't have enough time to develop backstory?
Yes. I actually felt that in the first two drafts that I was that I had talked about, and
Uh-huh.
which is why I decided on using a monologue, because I thought that it was much more easy. It was much easier for me to, you know, to manage this thing that I was trying to manage with, and because it was a short story and you don't have a lot of space in it. So I thought, that it would be difficult. It would be easier for me to, manage a short story, manage this thing, the story that I'm trying to write, in a write the story that I'm trying to write with a monologue, because because that person is having this dialogue with himself, and he's just
Mhm.
saying whatever is coming in his mind, and he and this thing just gets clear to the reader when they're reading it. So I think
Uh-huh.
that's what happened.
And we have a question from Homa Sheikh, who is also a contributor. Her story is called Gulmohar House. We'll have her in a subsequent session. Uh, which stories in the anthology have you enjoyed the most? I don't think Vijaya has a copy yet,
I don't
but
have a copy.
Maheen
I'm
can
I
just
haven't
answer.
had time to read them all yet. So far, I've just read both of Taha's and Sana's. So I'll get back to you once I'm
Really? Get back to us.
right.
Vijaya can say her story, so there you have it.
Yeah, yeah.
I think each story has to be savored. And this is Amna Hussain saying she's picked up a copy of the book. Thank you so much.
Thank
And she's
you.
looking forward to reading it, especially now. I guess we've converted a few readers with our discussion. Apparently, um, we have a few questions that keep coming up, but I also have a series of questions. So this session is called Experimenting with Genres in the COVID-19 story, and both of you have done that in different ways. Vijaya, yours is kind of like a ghost story. It doesn't seem like it until, well, hush hush.
Oh,
So do you
yeah.
think that the
Exactly.
In Pakistani fiction, the ghost story is not as widely um, written about, or nobody writes ghost stories anymore?
Yeah. You know, to be honest, I don't really know if I can, comment on that because
Uh-huh,
I'm not really aware of how this genre has been faring in Pakistan, or if
uh-huh,
if ghost stories are actually written here. And I don't even know if I was going to strictly adhere to this genre when I began, writing the
uh-huh,
story. I don't know if I really wanted the events of the story to start happening after the protagonist's death. Did I give it away? I think I did. So it just happened, and
it's actually
I
more
am
interesting. Let's not take it further than that. But yeah, more
so it
interesting. Yeah.
just happened, and I'm now glad that I did it, but I do think that there is so much more that can be done, regarding the ghost story genre. Narrating and listening to ghost stories is, something that we have probably grown up with. I mean, I'm
Mhm.
sure, that you must also have some, kind of a memory with, of you with a couple of other children narrating strange,
Of
creepy
course.
incidents,
Always.
often involving some kind of a paranormal entity or another. So I think we like ghost stories. We absolutely adore ghost stories, and or stories about things we probably cannot explain. Um, and it stems from our inherent fear of the unknown, I think, and
Uh-huh.
all sorts of things. Of such things, I guess, and we probably cannot get enough of it. But yeah, I think a lot can be done in this regard if it's not being done already, which I'm not
So
really
do
aware
you
of.
think the ghost story is the perfect kind of form or the perfect genre to be reading during COVID-19?
I
Do you
don't
want to be
think
terrified more than we already are?
I honestly don't think so. Yeah. I mean, if you would want yourself to get sad and about the things that are happening and everything, you want to be more anxious, then yeah. I mean, I'm not saying that you should not read my story, but
Uh,
it's not
Definitely read
that
it.
kind of
And actually, you do a very
indulgence.
good job with empathy in the story. So I think I'll leave it at that. I'll go to Maheen. Her story experiments with the genre because it merges forms. You have poetry and you have prose, but the writing is not just based on action. It's based on the inner mind. It's based on what's going on in the character's head. And would you like to comment on that? Do you think more Pakistani writing or just writing as a whole, regardless of the pandemic, should be more reflective in nature? Or do you feel there should be experimentation of some kind?
I definitely think there should be experimentation, and there is so much experimentation. I think that's the beauty of fiction in general. You can always
Uh,
experiment with your form of writing. And I mean, there are hidden rules, but there aren't very clear cut rules in the form and the way you express your own form. And that's honestly why I love short form fiction and short stories, because there doesn't have to be a clear middle or ending. Usually, there isn't a clear ending. And I think that's the beauty of it, because you have this tiny constrained room for experimentation, especially with character. And that's why That's why I wanted very limited characters in the story so I could focus all my energies on this main protagonist. And I think, yeah, it's something that I enjoy reading and writing, obviously. But I think it depends on the readers and writers if those are the stories they need to tell and those are the stories they need to read. In my opinion, reflective writing always has a level of relatability. So, in that sense, yeah,
Yeah.
I'm here for it.
So, I don't know if Vijaya has a copy of the book. You don't actually, right? But I was wondering if you guys could read the first paragraphs of your story, just so we can give readers a snippet. Would that be possible for you, Vijaya? Do you have
Yeah.
it written somewhere?
Yeah.
So who wants to go first?
Mahi, do you want to? I think you can.
Sure. I have to go, by the way, guys. If you wonder what it looks like. Okay. With the past. If words were tangible, she would eat them. She loved the way words could move, dance, and change. She smacked her lips at the sound of certain words, such as hope, ephemeral, and encapsulate. She loved the way they brought her lips together, twisted her tongue to touch her palate, and caused a lilt in her ears. Lena believed things always got better. Just as happiness is ephemeral, positivity too could be encapsulated and spent whenever needed. She had often put her belief into practice too. However, all of that changed when the word lockdown eased itself into her vocabulary in February. It began showing up all over the news when March collided with her. As the third month on the calendar came to a close, it erupted everywhere. Soon enough, it was all she could hear. Yeah, that's it.
Lovely. Yeah. Vijaya.
All right. I must have been asleep for hours, or what seemed like hours. I swear the phone rang not more than 5 minutes ago. Wasn't it dark then? It's certainly not dark anymore. I don't quite remember feeling sleepy though. If anything, I was feeling rather chirpy today. I mean, yesterday. It's so strange to have fallen asleep on my writing table, of all places. That shaky piece of wood has been many things to me, my nemesis, my muse, my friend. But it has never been a place where I can rest my head. Maybe the pandemic is finally getting to me. Yes, it could be that. Mimi often tells me I must get some fresh air and go on for a walk or something. She thinks constantly staying at home will drive me crazy. Well, Mimi has a tendency to overthink. That reminds me, I need to call her back. It's been 12 hours since she called and I didn't answer. She must be furious. Mothers, I tell you, so eager to love you, so eager to tear you apart. I think I'll just get my morning tea first. Mimi must be asleep right now, so I could still call her later in the morning. I think that's enough.
That's
Or,
beautiful.
yeah.
Yeah. So, so we have Mahin's story, Shadow of the Past, and Vijaya's story, The Unwritten Story. And I just wanted to ask you one final question, unless there are more on the chat forum. How do you respond to criticism of your work? Your work is now out there in the open, and what criticism do you anticipate for these stories, and how would you respond to it?
Interesting. I think, well, for this story in specific, I can say what I expect is it's a cliche to write about writing, but I think in a time like the pandemic, it was something that I needed to say and I needed to write about. But generally, I think I'm okay with criticism. I am stubborn with my writing, and I think, of course, you need to take it, and I think you ultimately know the best decision for yourself. Yeah, it's hard. I think there's a little line
It is really
kind of
difficult, of
decipher,
course.
but you know the
Creative
characters.
people.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you know the characters, you know the story, you know the message you're trying to send. It's up to the readers how they receive it. So
Yeah.
What about you, Vijaya?
So, of course, it is a bit scary, when, because, I've never really published fiction. I've never really, done fiction professionally. So it is a bit scary for me. But I am sort of open to criticism, because the thing is, I mean, I know it's easier said than done, but I think that I am a bit open, because this is I think that I'm learning this form of writing, and and criticism is perhaps the best way to improve your writing, or to to see what
Exactly.
you lack, or where you can where you can improve. And I think that is, I think criticism is important, and I hope that I'm open to it, and I'm the way I think I will.
I'm glad. Yeah. So these are our two writers who have written about writing and have experimented with the genre. And my one last question, and we will definitely end the call. Uh, where do you see COVID-19 writing going? What do you want to read about COVID-19 in fictional form? What would you like to read? What should people be writing about COVID-19 in fiction, that is? Any particular theme, any particular
I would like stories of hope, I think.
stories of hope?
Definitely.
And what about, yeah,
I think people are going to write about COVID-19, because, this is something major that happened in our lifetime. There are going to be stories, there's going to be fiction, more fiction about, based on COVID-19, that's what I think. But yes, as Maheen says, nobody you would want to read about the sadness and the anxiety and whatever the bad things that the world went through. We would want to write, of course readers would want to read more about yeah, as she said, stories of hope. It's
stories?
very important to.
So I'm just going to give a shout out to everyone who took the time to be here online virtually. Shobhan Ali says, glad to see Vajiha live on this page. We have Sadka Hussain Tayyib Ali saying, great seeing Maheen live. I see you guys have lots of fans. And Asad Sagar says, proud to see Maheen here. There's a lot of love for Maheen, so that's great.
Thanks.
We had an interesting program, Nikat Mutahir Hussain, and she's commented quite a bit. So that's delightful.
Also,
And she's also written an
Yes,
Urdu
because
poem.
you look cute. That's a very important comment, Taha.
yeah, you skipped it.
That we all look very cute.
Yeah.
And
Right comment for you also, Taha. Enjoyed Taha. Started writing a lot.
that's very generous of you, honestly. And I think we should wrap up. This has been an excellent session. So thank you so much for being here, Vajiha and Maheen. And please do get a
Thank
copy
you
of
for
the
having
Stained
us.
Glass Window.
Yes,
It was
you're
amazing.
welcome.
Yeah, I don't have a book, so I can't just
You
show
can't
it.
do that. You can just
But
thank you so much for being here, and we'll just yeah, thank you so much.
thank